main things Christians do is pray. That's probably one of the few things Christians all have in common. We all pray. We go to God and we ask God to do things for us. We tell God our problems, tell God what we'd like for Him to do. Now, one of the beliefs behind us praying is the belief that God is an approachable God. That is, the belief that God is interested in hearing us, the belief that God does hear us, and the belief that we can go to God with our concerns. That's God as an approachable God. And that means that God is a God we can have a personal connection with. We pray, or I pray, you pray because you think God hears you, God is interested in hearing you, and God is interested in what you want. That means that you have a personal one-on-one connection with God. Now, this is different from a lot of ways that people might picture God. Many people picture God as a distant and fearsome thing, as some kind of majestic, glorious, all-powerful being enthroned way off up into heaven. And if you think of God that way, it's easy to be afraid of God. You can go to the Psalms and read things like, "The glory of God thunders. The Lord thunders from heaven. The Most High utters His voice, hailstones and coals of fire. He sends out arrows and scatters the foe, lightning in abundance. Then the channels of the sea were seen, the foundations of the world were uncovered at your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils." Now when you hear things like that, it's easy to think, this is not a God I can approach. This is not a God I can have a personal connection with. If God is like this, it's best to just stay clear of Him. And so it is easy to picture God like that, sitting way off up in heaven with a scowl on His face, just waiting for you to make one wrong move, and you'll provoke Him, and He'll strike out at you. And that is a lot of times how people picture God. If we picture God that way, we wouldn't want a direct connection with God. How can you have a personal relationship with a fire-breathing dragon? And why would you want to, if that's the way God really is? There's no denying God is sometimes portrayed that way in both the Old Testament and the New. But the thing about the Bible is, as we found in here before, it never makes things simple. And that's the case here too. The Bible doesn't give us just one picture of God. As Christians, we believe that Jesus is what is called the ultimate revelation of God. And when it says ultimate revelation, that means that the picture we get of God from Jesus is the final word. It is the picture we can trust, and it is the picture that will never, never change. It is the one we can trust above all others. And so, in connection with this, Jesus introduced something new relating to God. Jesus introduced the concept of God as our Father. Now, Jesus referred to God as Father 165 times in the Gospels, and in the rest of the New Testament, God is referred to as Father 40 more times. That means God is referred to as Father over 200 times in the New Testament. That's very different from the Old Testament. In the entire Old Testament, God is only referred to as Father 15 times. And so, 200 in the New Testament, 15 in the Old. The Old Testament takes up probably 3 times as many pages as the New. So you can see the huge difference between the Old Testament and the New. It's even more difference when you consider that 9 out of the 15 times God is referred as Father in the Old Testament, He is referred as Father of the Hebrew people, in the sense of God was the one that brought the Hebrew people together, made them a people. The other times God is referred to Father in the Old Testament, the other 6 times, it is as being the father of a certain individual in the sense of bringing that individual into existence. So the reference to God as Father in the Old Testament is very specific. It is a reference to God as bringing something into existence. And even that concept, though, is found sparingly in the Old Testament, only 15 times. But in the New Testament, when Jesus used the phrase for God as our Father, he used it in an entirely different sense. Jesus introduced an entirely different way of looking at God as Father. Now, if you've grown up in a church that talks about the Trinity, that's Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, you might think that Jesus referred to Father because of that. After all, it says that Jesus was the Son of God, so naturally you would expect Jesus to refer to Father because of that. And it says that the Father is one of the persons of the Trinity, so you might think that Jesus was referring to one of the persons of the Trinity. But of course, the doctrine of the Trinity is not found in the Bible, and it was not in existence at the time of Jesus. It did not come into existence until some 300 years later. If you look carefully at the times when Jesus referred to God as Father, you'll see it has nothing to do with the Trinity. And it has nothing to do with him being the Son of God, as many Christians think of Jesus being the Son of God. The best way to understand what Jesus meant is to look at some of the times when he called God Father and see. For our gospel reading, we heard Jesus say, "If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to them that ask him?" You see, the image here is clear. Fathers want good things for their children. They want to give them good things. And so does God. That's the sense in which Jesus likens God to our Father. Think about what a father does when you're young, when you're a baby, when you're a child, when you're helpless. Your father takes care of you, provides you the things you need, and he provides you good things. As Jesus said, "Which man of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? If he asks for fish, will give him a snake?" You see, a father provides good things for his children, gives them what they need. The same thing is found in Matthew, when Jesus said, "Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For after all these things the nations seek. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things." Here again we see the image of God is like human fathers who take care of us and provide us with things we need. You can see that is an entirely different meaning from the image of Father that we found only scattered a few places in the Old Testament. One is the one who brings us into being responsible for origin, but the other one is the one who takes care of us and gives us the things we need. These are two completely different meanings of God being referred to as Father. The New Testament image of Father is found not only in the Gospels, but also in other places. We heard a reading from Galatians where it says that we are sons, adopted sons, and heirs of God. The book of Romans says that as many as are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. The book of 1 John says we are now the sons of God. You see, being sons of God or children of God means that God is our Father. And remember, when Jesus talked about God as Father, what he was talking about was that God is the one who cares for us and provides for our needs. God is the one that wants the best for us. That's what human fathers really want for their children. I'm sure every one of you wanted the best for your children. I'm sure every one of you worked to provide the best and guide them toward the best. And that's what God does also. And so that's the meaning that Jesus attached to God being our Father. And that's the way Jesus taught us to see God, as someone who cares for us, provides for our needs, and who wants the best for us. A father is someone you look up to, someone you turn to for advice, someone you turn to for help. A father is someone you turn to when you need anything. And Jesus tells us that God is just like that. And Jesus tells us God is standing ready, wanting to give us good things. All we have to do is ask. Now note that in the passages where Jesus talks about God as Father, he's not talking about the image of the Father as a slave driver, as someone who orders us around and tells us what to do. He's not talking about the image of someone who's trying to control us. He's talking about the one who wants to help us when we need something. When you bring up the image of God as Father, a lot of people will say, well, I didn't have a good father. My father was mean to me. He didn't provide for my needs. He beat me. He made my life miserable. And to these people, the image of Father is not a very good image. Now, I did not have a father like that, and so I cannot say I understand how people feel. But I think it's important to remember that none of us are perfect. We do not live in an ideal world. All of us fall short. Human fathers also fall short in their duties to their children. Of course, we also ourselves often fall short in things that we should be doing too. But I think when Jesus talks about God as our Father, he's not talking about the failings that human fathers have. He's talking about the ideal father, one who does what fathers are ideally supposed to do. And that's how we should understand God as Father, by looking at how fathers ideally are supposed to be, and not looking at how sometimes, of course, it turns out. So there's no reason to get bogged down in the father imagery if you had a less than perfect father. What you need to do is try to go to the imagery of an ideal father that represents what fathers should be. Of course, fathers are not always what they should be, but who of us ever was everything we should have been? We all have our failings. I want to look at something else interesting about the image of God as Father. It's interesting to notice that Jesus talked many times in the gospel about God as his Father. He talked many times in the gospel about God as your Father, but only one time in the entire New Testament, and that is in the Lord's Prayer, did Jesus talk about God as our Father. Just that one time. Only one time did Jesus make it a group thing. To Jesus, God being our Father is not a group thing. It's an individual thing. God is your Father individually. God is each one of our fathers individually, on a personal basis. And you see, that provides us with a different way of looking at God than one of the ways we talked about earlier, to see God sitting off in heaven, way off up there on some kind of throne, humongous, great, powerful, just waiting to strike you down if you do something wrong. God is a personal God. God is not a far-off, detached entity. Sometimes in the modern world, it is said that God is the ground of existence, or the source, or some things like that. For people that don't really believe in God, they try to make God a scientific principle. But Christianity has always believed that God is not a scientific principle. God is not a force or some kind of energy. Christianity has always believed that God is a personal being. And that means that God is localized in a place and has a being, just like I am. It doesn't mean that God looks like we do, but it does mean that Christianity has always insisted that God is a being, in the sense that God is a unique individual. Our image of God sometimes is this majestic, far-off things sitting way up in heaven sometimes nullifies that belief. But if you really think about what you've read when you've read in the Bible, you've never really seen God enthroned in heaven, isolated up there doing nothing. What you've read in the Bible is God interacting with people. God is not a force, God is not a principle, God is not a scientific hypothesis. God is a being who is interacting with individuals on an individual basis. If you read the Bible, you see this over and over again. It starts in Genesis with Adam and Eve. Genesis tells us that God used to come and walk in the evenings in the garden with Adam and Eve. God came to them, talked to them. We see the same thing happening with Cain. We see it happening with Noah, with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Joshua, David, Solomon. Just think all through the Bible, we see God interacting with people on a one-on-one basis. We see God even taking a human form and appearing in the book of Genesis and walking down the road. In Revelation chapter 3, Jesus said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will enter his house and dine with him, and he with me." Now stop for a minute and think about that. Picture Jesus standing at the door of your house, knocking on your door. He wants to come in and eat supper with you. He, as an individual, wants to come in your house, sit down at your table, and eat supper with you. He's not sending out a message that says, "I'm coming to the Shelby area, we're having a big thing over at the LeGrand Center, thousands of people, and I hope you'll be able to come." No. He says, "I want to come in your house and sit down at your table and eat with you." You see, that's the personal connection, thinking of God as your Father. Take a few minutes and think of your father. I'm looking around here. I knew 1, 2, 4 of you's father, 3 different people. I knew 4 of you's father. Now I'll tell you a little bit about my father. Now I remember when I was a teenager. I don't know if teenagers really do this anymore, but back then I thought your car had to be spotless. I'd get out every Saturday afternoon and I'd clean my car up, inside and out. I'd vacuum, wipe out the inside, clean everything. And I thought if you didn't do that, there was something wrong with you. You were lazy and trifling. Of course, you know, that's when I was a teenager. It was the only thing I had to do. I didn't have the responsibility of a family, and that's the only thing I had to do. So, but anyway, I thought that that's what you were supposed to do every week. And if you didn't, there's something wrong with you. My car was spotless. I got out there every Saturday and did that. If it rained, I pulled it to the carport and did that. Now, my car was only a few years old, but I started noticing some little spots on it. And I couldn't buff them out. That was back in the 70s, you know, before cars had clear coat on them like they do now. And I couldn't buff those spots out. It was really nothing. You couldn't see it unless you got down and looked, but to me it looked awful. And I told my father, I said, "My car needs painting." It really didn't, but you know what? It got painted. I remember the first time I ever went out of the country. That was way back before 9/11, before they were so paranoid, you know, in the airport about the security stuff. And back then, when you came into Charlotte off an international flight, you went down a hallway on one floor that sort of sloped and it went to another floor down to customs. And up here on this floor was a big old glass window thing. And the people who were coming to meet you, that's when you could actually go in the airport and meet somebody. They would go and stand in that glass window and they could see you going down that ramp to customs. And so here I was, I had been first time ever out of the country, and I did it alone by myself, not with a crew. And my father was picking me up at the airport, and when I started down that hallway to customs, I looked up, and there he was, standing at that glass window, just away, and smiling. Came to pick me up. My father liked to fix supper for me and Wanda. He had one menu: ham steak, green beans, and potato salad. He got the green beans and strung them himself and cooked them. He made the potato salad himself also. It's the best potato salad I've ever eaten. I try to make it just like he did, but mine's not very good. Mine's all right. It's not as good as his, though. And another funny thing, I remember back years ago about my father when VCRs first came out. I may have told this before, but when VCRs first came out years ago, my mother had taped Gone with the Wind. It was on sometime, and you know, you could set those things to come on. And she had set it, taped Gone with the Wind. We were going to watch it someday. And so then we had like 15 inches of snow. And that was back when, you know, nobody had SUVs and front-wheel drive cars, and it was those old rear-wheel drive cars that wouldn't go in the snow. And we had like 15 inches of snow, and it's still snowing. You couldn't get out of the house and go anywhere. And the roads were practically impassable, so we decided to, Mother said, oh, I'm going to put on this Gone with the Wind tape. And so there we were sitting there watching that Gone with the Wind tape. And back years ago, you know, on the TV would flash up the temperature, like it'd say temperature 72 degrees. Well, here it come up there, temperature 72 degrees on the screen. You know, Mother had taped it back earlier in the sun. And my father rose up out of his chair and he looked out the window and he said, it's hard to believe it's snowing like this at 72 degrees outside. We laughed about that for 30 years. Of course, the same thing goes with father-in-laws too. Wanda's daddy always liked to ride in mule wagons. And see, until I met Wanda, I had never ridden in a mule wagon. So he thought, well, you know, I need to ride in a mule wagon. So we get that thing out, hook it up, hook these mules to it. We start off through the field. Well, here we go. You know, I don't know if any of y'all have ever ridden a mule wagon. They go pretty slow. They go about 2 miles an hour. So here we are going through the field at 2 miles an hour, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, when is this going to get exciting? You know? So it wasn't getting very exciting, and so I looked over at him. I said, have you ever turned this thing over? He said, well, God, no. I said, you mean this is as fast as this thing goes? He said, yeah. I don't think I ever rode in it again. Going 2 miles an hour through a field in a mule wagon ain't my idea of a good time, but it was his. My father-in-law was very good to me to be able to help me. I made the statement, I did ride horses. I made the statement one time that I would like to have a riding ring, and it wasn't but a couple of weeks until there one was. And when I was building, when I first started tobacco, I started about a certain kind of curing rack, and I had to drill big holes in 4-inch posts. And I had about probably 40 4-inch posts I had to drill these big holes in. I was out there with a cordless drill trying to drill big holes in 4-inch posts, and it wasn't going so well. And Wanda's father rode out there, and he sat there and looked for a minute, and he said, I'll be right back. So he goes out and gets an impact drill and brings me this big impact drill, and that thing went through them 4-inch posts like it was nothing, just like it was butter. So I think sometimes what I've told about my father and my father-in-law, if we could look at God as our Father in that way, maybe when Jesus was telling us to look at God as our Father, those are the kind of things that we should look at God as our Father about. And so maybe that's the way we should be looking at God, as the Father who wants the best for us, as the Father who wants to give us good things, as the Father who wants to help us, and as the Father who truly is involved in our lives, working to give us good things.